The phone call came at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, and Era Delacroix knew her world was ending before she even answered. She had been organizing Dante Rossi's schedule for the next week, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, when her personal phone buzzed against her hip. The caller ID made her stomach drop. Maya. Her sister never called during work hours. Ever. Have you ever gotten one of those calls that you know will change everything before you even pick up? I'm curious where you're watching from today, because I bet no matter what city or state you're in, you understand that feeling of dread when the phone rings at the wrong time. Era's hand trembled as she swiped to answer. Maya, she whispered, glancing toward Dante's closed office door. Her boss was in a meeting with his lieutenants, the kind of meeting where she knew better than to interrupt unless the building was literally on fire. Era, Maya's voice came through broken and terrified. They took me. They said they want $500,000 or they're going to kill me. They said to tell you it's about Dad's old debts. The phone slipped from Era's nerveless fingers, clattering against her desk. $500,000. The number echoed in her head like a death sentence. She made $38,000 a year as Dante's personal secretary. She had maybe $2,000 in savings. Her father had been dead for 3 years, and she thought his gambling debts had died with him. Era scrambled to pick up the phone, but the line was already dead. She sat frozen at her desk, staring at the black screen of her phone, her mind racing and blank at the same time. $500,000. Maya kidnapped. Her baby sister, who was supposed to be safe at college, who was supposed to be studying for her psychology finals, who was supposed to call their mother this weekend like she always did. The tears started before she realized they were coming, hot and relentless, spilling down her cheeks and onto her white silk blouse. She couldn't breathe. The air in the outer office felt too thin, too warm, suffocating. She needed somewhere to go, somewhere to think, somewhere to fall apart without anyone seeing. Dante's private office had a closet in the back corner, behind his massive mahogany desk. He kept his extra suits there, along with a safe she pretended not to know about. Era had cleaned it once when his regular housekeeper was sick. It was spacious enough for a person to stand in, and most importantly, it had a door that locked from the inside. She stumbled across the marble floor of Dante's office, past the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Chicago, past the leather furniture that cost more than most people made in a year. Her hands shook as she turned the handle of the closet door and slipped inside, pulling it closed behind her. The space smelled like expensive cologne and cedar hangers. Dante's suits hung around her like dark sentinels, Italian wool and silk that probably cost thousands each. She sank to the floor between them, finally allowing herself to break. The sobs came in great, gasping waves that shook her entire body. Maya kidnapped. Her sister, who still slept with the stuffed elephant their mother had given her when she was 5. Her sister, who called Era every Sunday to complain about her professors and her roommate and the terrible cafeteria food. Her sister, who trusted Era to take care of everything the way she had been doing since their parents died. $500,000. Where was she supposed to get $500,000? She could barely make rent on her studio apartment. She bought her clothes from discount stores and lived on ramen and whatever was cheapest at the grocery store. The only reason she could afford to work in downtown Chicago was because Dante paid her well enough to survive. But well enough to survive and well enough to ransom a kidnapped sister were two very different things. Her father's gambling debts. She thought she had handled all of that when he died. She had paid off everything she could find, sold everything of value, worked 3 jobs while finishing her business degree just to keep their heads above water. How could there still be debts? How could someone still want money after 3 years? The closet door handle turned. Era's head snapped up, terror flooding her system as lights spilled into the dark space. She scrambled to wipe her face, to compose herself, but it was too late. Dante Rossi stood in the doorway, his dark green eyes taking in every detail of her presence on his closet floor. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice carrying that quiet authority that made grown men step back and apologize. He was still wearing the charcoal suit he had put on for his morning meetings, his dark hair styled perfectly despite the long day. At 35, Dante commanded respect from everyone around him, from his business associates to the politicians whose campaigns he funded to the judges who owed him favors. Era struggled to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rossi." I needed a moment. I'll get back to work right away. You've been crying, Dante observed, stepping fully into the closet and closing the door behind him. The space that had felt spacious moments ago now felt impossibly small with his presence filling it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a way of making any room feel like it belonged to him. In the closet, with expensive suits surrounding them both, Era felt like she was drowning in his attention. I'm fine, she lied, her voice still thick with tears. Just a personal matter. Nothing that affects my work performance. Dante moved closer, and Era caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that she had grown to associate with safety over the 2 years she had worked for him. He had never been anything but professional with her, never inappropriate, never demanding beyond the requirements of her job. But he was also dangerous in ways that most people only whispered about, connected to things that happened in the shadows of the city. Era, his voice was gentler now, almost careful. What happened? She opened her mouth to lie again, to insist everything was fine, but the tears started falling again before she could form words. It's my sister, she whispered. Someone took her. They want $500,000, or they'll kill her. Something changed in Dante's expression, a hardening around his eyes that made the air in the closet feel electric. Who took her? He asked, and his voice was no longer gentle. I don't know, Era sobbed. They called and said it was about my father's old gambling debts, but he's been dead for 3 years. I thought I had paid everything off. I don't have that kind of money. I don't have anywhere near that kind of money. Dante was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light filtering through the crack under the door. Then he reached out and cupped her cheek in his hand, his thumb brushing away her tears with surprising gentleness. Look at me, Era. She met his eyes, those dark green depths that could be warm or cold depending on his mood. Right now they were warm, concerned, and something else she couldn't quite identify. No one touches what's mine, Dante said quietly. And you've been mine for 2 years now, even if neither of us said it out loud. Before she could process what that meant, he pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with fierce protectiveness. She could feel the steady beat of his heart through his shirt, could feel the strength in his arms that made her feel safe for the first time since the phone call. We're going to get your sister back, he murmured against her hair. And whoever took her is going to learn what happens when they threaten my family. Dante kept his arms around Era as he guided her from the closet into his office, her body still trembling against his. She felt small and fragile in a way that made something protective and primal rise in his chest. In the 2 years she had worked for him, he had noticed her quiet efficiency, her intelligence, the way she anticipated his needs before he voiced them. He had also noticed the way her dark hair caught the light from his office windows, and how her rare smiles could brighten his entire day. But he had kept those observations carefully locked away, telling himself she was off limits, too good for his world. That had just changed. Sit, he told her gently, settling her into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Don't move. Dante crossed to his office door and pressed the intercom button. Marco, Vincent, Tony. My office. Now. He could see the questions in Era's eyes as she watched him, could see her trying to process what had just happened between them. 2 years of careful professional distance had been shattered in the space of a few minutes, and he knew she was struggling to understand the shift. He was struggling with it himself. The moment she had told him about her sister, something fundamental had changed in his world. The idea of someone threatening Era, of someone causing her the kind of pain he had just witnessed, filled him with a rage that surprised him with its intensity. His lieutenants appeared within minutes. Marco Benedetti, his second-in-command, a man in his 40s with graying temples and the kind of steady loyalty that couldn't be bought. Vincent Torino, younger and hungrier, responsible for intelligence gathering and connections throughout the city. Tony Salvatore, his enforcer, broad-shouldered and quiet until violence was necessary. All 3 men's eyes went immediately to Era, taking in her tear-stained face and her position in what was clearly a protected seat under Dante's watchful eye. Gentlemen, Dante began, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire from the ground up. I want you to meet Era Delacroix. As of today, she is under my personal protection. Her family is our family. Any threat to her is a threat to me directly. Era's head snapped up at his words, her brown eyes wide with shock. She started to speak, to protest, but Dante's raised hand stopped her. Her sister has been taken by parties unknown, he continued, settling behind his desk, but keeping his attention split between his men and Era. They're demanding $500,000, claiming connection to old gambling debts. I want everything we can find on the Delacroix family, every debt, every connection, every enemy. And I want it within the hour. Vincent nodded, already pulling out his phone. I'll start with the gambling circuit. See who might have held paper on her father. Marco stepped forward slightly. Boss, do we know who we're dealing with yet? Working on it, Dante replied. But regardless of who they are, they made a mistake when they touched her family. Era finally found her voice. Mr. Rossi, I can't ask you to do this. I can't ask you to risk your organization for my problems. Dante's eyes met hers across the desk, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. You're not asking, Era. I'm telling you how this is going to work. You belong to me now. That means your problems are my problems, your family is my family, and your enemies are about to discover what happens when they threaten what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a warm shiver down her spine, a feeling of safety she hadn't experienced since her parents died. For 3 years, she had carried every burden alone, had faced every crisis with nothing but her own determination and whatever small resources she could scrape together. The idea that someone with Dante's power and resources was claiming her, protecting her, felt like being rescued from drowning. Tony spoke up from his position near the door. You want us to put the word out that she's under protection? Do it, Dante confirmed. Make sure everyone understands that Era Delacroix and her family are off limits. Anyone who has information about her sister's whereabouts brings it to us immediately. Vincent's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen before looking up. I've got a contact at the Riverside Casino who might remember her father. Delacroix rang a bell. Go, Dante ordered. Take Marco with you. I want answers before midnight. As his men filed out of the office, Dante turned his full attention back to Era. She was sitting straighter now, some of her composure returning, but he could still see the fear lurking in her dark eyes. You're coming home with me, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It's not safe for you to be alone until we know who we're dealing with. Mr. Rossi, Era began, but he cut her off. Dante, he corrected. And this isn't a discussion, Era. Whoever took your sister knows who you are, knows where you work, probably knows where you live. Until they're eliminated, you stay where I can protect you. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the reality of her situation. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. Why are you doing this for me? Dante moved around the desk to stand in front of her chair, reaching down to take her hands in his. For 2 years, you've been the best part of my day, he said quietly. Walking into this office every morning and seeing you here, knowing you were safe and close, it became something I didn't realize I needed until right now when someone threatened to take it away. Era's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different from the desperate sobs in the closet. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something deeper that she wasn't ready to examine yet. Dante's phone rang, cutting through the intimate moment. He answered it without looking away from Era's face. Rossi, a voice she didn't recognize came through the speaker, cold and accented. Mr. Rossi, I believe you have something that belongs to us. Dante's expression hardened instantly. I don't believe we've been introduced. My name is Alexei Volkov. Your secretary's father owed my organization a considerable sum when he died. His daughter has inherited that debt, along with the consequences of non-payment. Era gasped, her hands tightening in Dante's grip. She had heard whispers about the Volkov organization, Russian connections with a reputation for brutality that made even Dante's people nervous. The debt was $500,000, Volkov continued. We took the girl as collateral. If you're smart, Mr. Rossi, you'll convince your employee to pay what her family owes, and we can all move on with our lives. Dante's voice when he responded was colder than winter in Chicago. Let me explain something to you, Volkov. Era Delacroix is mine. Her sister is mine. And you made this a war the moment you touched her family. You have 12 hours to return the girl unharmed, or I'm going to show you why people in this city know better than to threaten what belongs to me. The line went quiet for several seconds. Then Volkov's laughter filled the office, ugly and mocking. You would risk your empire for your secretary's family problems? How romantic. How foolish. 12 hours, Dante repeated, and ended the call. Era stared at him in shock. You just declared war on the Volkov organization. For me. For my sister. Dante pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle but firm on her shoulders. I told you, Era. You're mine now. And I protect what's mine, no matter what it costs. Dante's penthouse occupied the top floor of a glass tower that pierced the Chicago skyline like a steel needle. Era had never been there before, though she had arranged meetings and deliveries to the building countless times. Walking through the private elevator that opened directly into his living space felt surreal, like stepping into a world that existed parallel to her own modest life. The apartment was masculine and expensive, all dark wood and leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city below. But it was also warmer than she had expected, lived in rather than sterile, with books scattered on side tables and a kitchen that showed signs of actual use. Dante guided her to a leather sectional facing the windows, his hand remaining possessively on her lower back. You should eat something, he said gently. When's the last time you had a real meal? Era tried to remember and realized she couldn't. The last few weeks had been a blur of work and worry, of stretching her small paycheck to cover both her expenses and sending money to help Maya with textbooks and groceries. I'm not really hungry, she said, which was true. Her stomach felt twisted with anxiety and fear. You need to keep your strength up, Dante insisted, moving toward the kitchen. We have a long night ahead of us. As if summoned by his words, the elevator chimed and Marco appeared, followed by Vincent and 3 other men Era recognized as part of Dante's inner circle. They carried laptops and folders, transforming the elegant living room into a command center within minutes. Vincent looked up from spreading papers across the coffee table. We found the connection, he announced. Era's father wasn't just gambling. He was laundering money for the Volkovs through his accounting firm. When he died, they lost their cleanest pipeline for moving cash through legitimate businesses. Era felt the blood drain from her face. Her father had been laundering money, the quiet man who had worried about paying their mortgage, who had clipped coupons and argued with her mother about spending $10 on takeout. Marco pulled out a thick file. They've been looking for a way to replace that income stream ever since. Taking Maya wasn't just about old debt. They want Era to step into her father's role, use her position with you to clean their money through your legitimate businesses. Dante's expression darkened as the pieces clicked into place. They think they can force her to be their inside contact in my organization. That's why they took the sister instead of just killing her for the debt, Vincent continued. They need Era functional and motivated. Dead family members don't make good leverage for long-term business relationships. Era listened to them dissect her family's tragedy with the clinical precision of strategists, and something inside her began to burn. They were talking about her father, her sister, her life like pieces on a chessboard, like problems to be solved rather than people to be saved. I want to help, she said suddenly, cutting through their tactical discussion. The room went quiet. All 6 men turned to look at her, and she could see the mixture of surprise and concern on their faces. Era, Dante said carefully, you've been through enough. Let us handle this. No, she said, standing up from the couch with new determination. This is my family. My father's choices. My sister's life. I'm not going to sit here like a helpless victim while you risk your lives cleaning up my mess. It's not a mess, Dante said firmly. It's a threat to what's mine, which makes it my responsibility. But Era shook her head. If they want me to be their inside connection, then maybe that's exactly what we give them. Let me be the bait. Absolutely not. Dante's voice carried the kind of authority that usually ended discussions immediately. But Era stepped closer to him, meeting his eyes with a courage that surprised them both. You said I was yours, she challenged. That means trusting me to be strong enough to handle this, doesn't it? Something shifted in Dante's expression as he looked at her, really looked at her. The crying, broken woman from his closet was gone. In her place stood someone fierce and determined, someone willing to fight for the people she loved. Vincent cleared his throat. Boss, she might have a point. If we can control the meeting, use her as planned bait. We'll discuss strategy later, Dante cut him off. Marco, I want surveillance on all known Volkov properties. Vincent, work your contacts for intelligence on their security protocols. Everyone else, start mapping their operations. I want to know every weakness, every vulnerability. As his men scattered to their tasks, Dante took Era's hand, and led her down a hallway lined with what looked like expensive artwork. She caught glimpses of paintings and sculptures that probably cost more than her annual salary. He stopped at a door near the end of the hall and opened it to reveal what was clearly a personal gym. Weights, a punching bag, mats for floor work, and along one wall, a locked gun cabinet that made Era's breath catch. "If you're going to insist on being involved," Dante said, "then you're going to learn how to protect yourself." For the next 2 hours, Dante put her through basic self-defense training with a patience and gentleness that surprised her. He showed her how to break free from different types of grabs, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to target vulnerable spots that could disable someone much larger than herself. His hands were careful as he positioned her body, his voice encouraging when she struggled with the technique. She found herself hyper-aware of every place he touched her, every moment when their bodies came close during the training. The attraction she had been suppressing for 2 years was impossible to ignore now that he had claimed her so completely. When he moved behind her to correct her stance, his chest pressed against her back and his breath warm against her ear, Era felt her body respond in ways that had nothing to do with self-defense. "You're a fast learner," Dante murmured, his hands lingering on her waist longer than the instruction required. "Good teacher," she replied, then immediately felt heat rise in her cheeks at how breathless she sounded. Dante turned her in his arms so they were facing each other, his dark green eyes searching her face. "Era, there's something you should know about me, about why I can't let anything happen to you." She waited, sensing this was important, something he didn't share easily. "I was 15 when my mother was killed," he said quietly. "Rival families thought they could weaken my father by targeting his wife. They took her from a charity event, sent pieces of her jewelry as proof of life, demanded he abandon territories in exchange for her return." Era's heart clenched at the pain she could see in his eyes, even after all these years. "He tried to negotiate, tried to give them what they wanted," Dante continued. "But they killed her anyway. Used her death to send a message that no one in our world was truly safe." "I'm sorry," Era whispered, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's why I've never let anyone get close," Dante said, leaning into her touch. "Why I've built walls around everyone I care about. But with you, losing you would destroy something in me that I didn't even know existed until today." The vulnerability in his admission broke something open in Era's chest. She had spent 2 years thinking he was untouchable, unreachable, a man who lived in a world too dangerous for someone like her. But here he was, showing her the wounded boy beneath the powerful exterior. "My father wasn't a bad man," she said softly. "He was just weak. The gambling started after my mother got sick, when the medical bills began piling up and he was desperate to find a way to pay for her treatment. By the time she died, he was in so deep with so many people that he couldn't find a way out." Dante's hands framed her face, his thumbs stroking along her cheekbones. "You're not responsible for his choices. But Maya is paying for them," Era replied. "And now you are too." Before Dante could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, and his expression went deadly cold. "What is it?" Era asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Dante showed her the phone. The message was a photo of a piece of torn fabric, pale blue cotton stained with dark spots that could only be blood. Maya's missing person shirt, the one she had been wearing in the security footage Vincent had obtained from her college campus. The message below the photo was simple. "Tomorrow night. Warehouse District. Pier 17. Come alone or she dies." But there was more. Another message appeared as they watched. "Or perhaps you'd prefer to settle this the old way. Your champion against ours. Winner takes everything." Era stared at the screen in horror. "They want you to fight someone for Maya's life." Dante was already moving, pulling her toward the door. "It's called trial by combat," he explained grimly. "Old-school dispute resolution when negotiation breaks down. I fight their champion. Winner determines all terms." "You could be killed," Eris said, panic rising in her voice. Dante stopped and pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with fierce possessiveness. "Then I better make sure I win." The kiss happened without warning, passionate and desperate, as if he was trying to memorize the taste of her lips before walking into battle. Era kissed him back with equal desperation, pouring 2 years of suppressed attraction and the terror of potentially losing him into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. If something happens to me tomorrow, Marco will take care of you and Maya. You'll both be protected. Nothing is going to happen to you, Era said fiercely. I won't let it. Dante smiled at that, the first real smile she had seen from him since this nightmare began. My fierce little secretary, he murmured. What did I ever do to deserve you? You found me crying in your closet, Era replied, and instead of firing me, you declared war for me. Best decision I ever made, Dante said, and kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. When they returned to the living room, the command center had expanded. More men, more equipment, detailed floor plans, and satellite photos covering every surface. This was Dante's empire mobilizing for war, and Era realized with a mixture of terror and amazement that it was all happening because someone had threatened her family. Boss, Marco called out, we've got the layout of Pier 17. If they're planning combat, there are only a few ways to structure it safely. Vincent looked up from a laptop. And I've got intelligence on who they're likely to use as their champion. Viktor Kozlov, Volkov's enforcer. Ex-Russian military, multiple combat sports championships, never been beaten in trial by combat. Era felt ice form in her stomach. This Viktor had never lost a fight. Dante's expression didn't change, but she could feel the tension in his body as he studied the information his men had gathered. Then we'll have to make sure there's a first time for everything, he said calmly. But Era could see the calculation in his eyes, the grim assessment of odds and possibilities. Tomorrow night, the man who had just claimed her completely might die fighting for her sister's freedom. And if he lost, she would lose both the sister she had raised and the man she was only now beginning to realize she loved. The warehouse district at midnight looked like a graveyard of industrial ambition, abandoned buildings rising like tombstones against the Chicago skyline. Pier 17 squatted at the edge of the lake, a massive concrete structure that had once housed shipping operations but now served as neutral ground for the kind of business that happened in shadows. Era crouched on the roof of a neighboring building, her hands steady on the rifle Dante had reluctantly taught her to use during their final hours of preparation. She could see the warehouse floor through the industrial windows, could see the ring of lights that had been set up around a cleared circle where two men would fight for her sister's life. She wasn't supposed to be here. Dante had explicitly ordered her to stay at the penthouse with additional security, but Era had never been good at following orders when the people she loved were in danger. Marco had helped her slip away, understanding better than Dante did that she would never forgive herself if she sat safely behind walls while others risked everything for her family. Through her scope, she watched Dante enter the warehouse flanked by 6 of his men. Even from a distance, she could see the controlled tension in his movements, the way he carried himself like a predator walking into a trap he knew about but couldn't avoid. He wore dark jeans and a black t-shirt, clothes that would move with him during combat, and she could see the knife sheathed at his back even though the agreed terms specified hand-to-hand only. The Volkovs were already there, at least 15 men arranged around their half of the space. Alexei Volkov himself stood near the far wall, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he had never thrown a punch in his life, but had watched plenty of other people die. Beside him stood Viktor Kozlov, the champion who had never lost a trial by combat. Viktor was enormous, easily 6 inches taller than Dante, and probably 60 pounds heavier, all of it muscle and scar tissue. His head was shaved, revealing a network of scars that suggested he had been fighting seriously for most of his life. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never met an opponent he couldn't break. Maya was visible near the back of the warehouse, tied to a chair but clearly alive, her blonde hair reflecting the harsh overhead lights. Even from this distance, Era could see the fear in her sister's posture, the way she held herself small and still like prey, trying not to attract a predator's attention. The rules were simple and ancient. Single combat, no weapons, fight until submission or death. Winner determined all terms for the defeated party. If Dante won, Maya would be released and the Volkovs would withdraw their claims on the Delacroix family permanently. If Viktor won, Dante's organization would pay the $500,000 ransom plus interest, and Era would work for the Volkovs as their inside connection to Chicago's criminal elite. Era watched through her scope as the 2 men approached the center of the makeshift ring, and her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough that she worried it might affect her aim. This was insane. Dante was intelligent, strategic, deadly in his own way, but Victor looked like he could break a man's spine with his bare hands. The fight began without ceremony, Victor lunging forward with the speed of someone who had learned that overwhelming force could end confrontations before his opponents had time to think. But Dante was ready for it, sidestepping and using Victor's momentum to send him stumbling past. For the first few minutes, it looked like strategy might triumph over brute force. Dante was faster, more agile, better at reading his opponent's intentions and positioning himself advantageously. He landed several solid hits, targeting pressure points and vulnerable joints with surgical precision. But Victor's advantage became clear as the fight continued. Every hit Dante landed seemed to have minimal effect, while every blow Victor connected with drove Dante backward, left him gasping and struggling to maintain his footing. This wasn't a boxing match or a martial arts demonstration. This was survival combat against someone who had been bred for violence. When Victor finally got his hands on Dante, wrapping massive arms around his torso in a bear hug that would have crushed a normal man's ribs, Era felt terror unlike anything she had experienced since Maya's kidnapping. She watched Dante's face contort with pain as Victor lifted him off the ground and began squeezing, and she knew she was watching the man she loved being killed slowly. Dante managed to break free using a technique that involved slamming his forehead into Victor's nose with enough force to draw blood, but the damage was done. His left arm hung at an odd angle, probably dislocated shoulder, and his breathing was labored in a way that suggested injured ribs. Victor spat blood and smiled, an expression that revealed several gold teeth and made him look like something from a nightmare. He began stalking Dante around the ring with renewed confidence, no longer in a hurry now that his opponent was wounded. That was when Era noticed movement at the edge of her scope vision that made her blood freeze. 3 Volkov soldiers were moving toward Maya's position, not to protect her, but to relocate her. One of them was carrying zip ties and what looked like a taser. They were planning to move Maya regardless of the combat outcome, probably to ensure they had leverage even if Victor lost. This wasn't about honoring ancient rules of trial by combat. This was about ensuring the Volkovs won no matter what happened in the ring. Era's decision was instant and irreversible. She shifted her scope to target the soldier with the restraints, calculated windage and distance with skills she had learned during police academy training before her father's death changed her career plans. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as she fired, and the man dropped immediately. The warehouse erupted into chaos as the sound of gunfire echoed off concrete walls. The Volkov soldiers began shouting and pointing at the windows, trying to locate the shooter while drawing their own weapons. The trial by combat rules had just been shattered, which meant all agreements were void. But Dante used the confusion to his advantage, striking Victor with a combination of moves that targeted his injured nose and the knee. Era had seen him favoring slightly. When Victor stumbled, Dante followed up with a submission hold that cut off blood flow to the brain despite the size difference between them. Victor fought the hold for nearly 30 seconds, his massive hands clawing at Dante's arms, before his body went limp. Dante held the position for several more seconds to ensure he was truly unconscious, then released him and stood on shaking legs. The Volkov soldiers were advancing on both Maya's position and toward the center ring, where Dante stood swaying with exhaustion and injuries. Era shifted targets rapidly, dropping 2 more men who were moving to cut off escape routes, her police academy training taking over as muscle memory guided her actions. Marco and the rest of Dante's team had entered the warehouse through side entrances the moment gunfire started, turning what should have been a formal combat into an urban battlefield. But the Volkovs had brought more men than anticipated, and the numerical advantage was still in their favor. Era watched Dante fight his way toward Maya's position, every movement showing the cost of his battle with Victor. His left arm was clearly useless, his breathing labored, blood streaming from cuts on his face and scalp. But he moved with deadly purpose, cutting through opponents who underestimated his remaining capability. When Alexei Volkov himself drew a pistol and aimed it at Dante's back while he was engaged with 2 other soldiers, Era didn't hesitate. Her shot took Volkov's center mass, dropping him instantly and sending his remaining men into retreat. The rescue of Maya should have been the end of it, But as Dante cut her restraints and helped her stand, Era spotted the real problem through her scope. Additional vehicles were arriving outside the warehouse, at least 3 SUVs full of Volkov reinforcements responding to the gunfire. She used her radio to alert Marco. "Company coming," she reported tersely. "Multiple vehicles, maybe 15 additional hostiles." Dante's voice came back immediately. "Get to the extraction point. We'll meet you there." But as Era watched the new arrivals position themselves to block all obvious exit routes, she realized the extraction plan had been compromised. The Volkovs weren't just trying to win the original confrontation. They were trying to eliminate Dante's entire leadership team in one operation. Era abandoned her sniper position and began moving rapidly across rooftops toward the warehouse, using skills she had learned during her brief military service before college. She had never told Dante about her 2 years in the Army Reserve, hadn't thought it was relevant to her job as his secretary. Now those skills might be the difference between his survival and his death. She reached the warehouse just as the first explosions echoed through the structure. The Volkovs were using grenades to flush Dante's team out of cover, turning the interior into a killing zone. Era could hear gunfire and shouting from inside, could see muzzle flashes through the windows that suggested a running battle. The building's fire escape gave her access to an upper-level entrance that the Volkovs hadn't covered. She moved through the warehouse's second floor cautiously, looking for a position where she could provide effective support without becoming another casualty. She found Dante and Maya pinned behind a stack of shipping containers, while Volkov soldiers advanced from multiple directions. Dante was down to a pistol with maybe half a magazine remaining, and his injured condition meant he was fighting on determination rather than physical capability. Era positioned herself on a catwalk overlooking the main floor and began systematic shooting, targeting the advancing soldiers with precision that would have impressed her army instructors. She wasn't trying for kill shots necessarily, but for stopping shots that would remove threats while conserving ammunition. When one of the Volkov soldiers spotted her position and began firing upward, Dante looked up and their eyes met across the chaotic distance. She saw shock and fury cross his face as he realized she was there, realized she had ignored his orders to stay safe, and instead followed him into battle. But there was something else in his expression too, something that looked like pride and fierce admiration. She wasn't just the secretary who needed protection anymore. She was a partner who could fight beside him when everything went wrong. The battle ended when Chicago police sirens began wailing in the distance, probably responding to reports of explosions and automatic weapons fire. The surviving Volkov soldiers scattered rather than risk arrest, leaving their dead and wounded behind along with any hope of completing their original mission. In the sudden quiet, Era climbed down from her position and ran toward Dante and Maya. Her sister was shaking but uninjured, traumatized but alive. Dante was bleeding from multiple wounds and barely standing, but his eyes were clear and focused on her approach. When she reached them, Dante pulled both women against his chest with his good arm, holding them like he was afraid they might disappear. For a moment, the three of them stood together in the wreckage of the warehouse, breathing hard and alive against all odds. "You disobeyed orders," Dante said against Era's hair, but his voice carried relief rather than anger. "Good thing too," Era replied, helping support his weight as Marco and the others reached their position. "You would have been dead without backup." Maya looked between them with the confused expression of someone processing trauma while trying to understand new information. "Era, is this your boss? The one you've been in love with for 2 years, but thought was completely out of reach?" Even in the aftermath of violence, Era felt heat rise in her cheeks. Maya had always been too perceptive for her own good. Dante's uninjured arm tightened around her waist. "Not her boss anymore," he said firmly. "Her partner. In everything." As they walked toward the exit together, leaning on each other for support, Era realized that everything in her life had changed in the space of 48 hours. She was no longer a secretary struggling to survive in Chicago. She was a woman who had fought beside the man she loved to save her family, who had proven herself capable of violence when protection required it, who belonged in his dangerous world as much as he belonged in hers. The crying woman from the closet was gone forever, replaced by someone who could face whatever came next with confidence and deadly capability. The hospital discharged Dante after 6 hours of x-rays, stitches, and stern lectures from doctors who recognized the signs of combat injuries, but knew better than to ask too many questions. His left shoulder had been dislocated but not broken, his ribs bruised but not fractured, and the cuts on his face would heal without permanent scarring. Maya had been more psychologically than physically damaged by her ordeal, spending most of the ride back to Dante's penthouse pressed against Era's side, like she was afraid to let her sister out of arm's reach. She had been brave during the rescue, but now that the immediate danger was over, the full impact of what had happened was beginning to hit her. "You saved my life," Maya told Dante quietly as they sat in his living room 3 days later. The swelling around his eyes had gone down enough that he looked human again, though the bruises painted his face in shades of purple and yellow that made him appear more dangerous than usual. "We saved your life," Dante corrected, glancing at Era where she sat beside him on the couch. "Your sister put herself in harm's way to make sure you came home safely." Vincent appeared from the war room that had been set up in Dante's spare bedroom, carrying reports and reconnaissance photos. "We've identified 3 remaining Volkov cells operating in the city," he announced without preamble. None of them were at the warehouse, which means they're still operational and probably planning retaliation. Era felt her stomach clench. She had been hoping the warehouse battle had ended the threat, that Maya's rescue meant they could all return to something resembling normal life. But apparently safety was going to require more violence, more risk. "How dangerous are they?" she asked, noting the way Dante's expression had hardened at Vincent's report. "Dangerous enough," Marco replied, entering from the kitchen with coffee for everyone. "The cells are small, maybe 4 or 5 men each, but they're the survivors. The smart ones who didn't get caught in our trap." Dante studied the photographs Vincent had spread across the coffee table, images of men who looked like they had been carved from stone and violence. "I want them eliminated," he said simply. "All of them. I want the Volkov presence in Chicago completely erased so there's never a question about Era's safety again." Over the next week, Era watched Dante's organization operate with surgical precision to dismantle the remaining threat. She didn't participate directly in the operations, but she helped with intelligence gathering, using her analytical skills to identify patterns and connections that the men might have missed. It was fascinating and terrifying to see how efficiently violence could be organized and executed by people who understood the system. Each Volkov cell was located, isolated, and eliminated with minimal collateral damage and maximum discretion. The men simply disappeared, their operations shut down, their weapons and resources redistributed to other organizations or destroyed entirely. Maya gradually began to heal from her trauma, helped by daily sessions with a therapist Dante had recommended and paid for without being asked. She also began to understand the complexity of the world her sister had entered, asking careful questions about Dante's business and Era's role in his life. "He really loves you," Maya observed one afternoon when Dante was in meetings and the sisters were alone in his kitchen. "I can see it in the way he looks at you, like you're the most important thing in his entire world." "It scares me sometimes," Era admitted. "The intensity of it. 2 weeks ago, I was just his secretary, and now I'm the center of his universe. What if I can't be what he needs me to be?" Maya smiled, the first completely unguarded expression Era had seen from her since the rescue. "You fought armed men on a rooftop to save his life," she pointed out. "You proved you can be exactly what he needs you to be." 2 weeks after the warehouse battle, Vincent brought news that the last Volkov operative had been located and eliminated. Dmitry Petrov, the cell leader who had been coordinating retaliation plans from a safe house in Milwaukee, had been found dead in his apartment along with his remaining associates. "It's over," Vincent announced to the assembled group. "The Volkov organization has been completely removed from our territory. There's no one left to threaten the family." Era felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying so long she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. For the first time since Maya's kidnapping, she could think about the future without wondering if they would all survive to see it. That evening, Dante asked her to join him on the penthouse balcony as the sun set over Chicago. The city spread below them like a jeweled blanket, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over the skyline. "I have something to ask you," Dante said, and there was a nervousness in his voice that she had never heard before. This man who could command armies and eliminate enemies without hesitation was anxious about a conversation with her. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket and dropped to one knee on the stone balcony, the city lights reflecting in his dark green eyes. Era Delacroix, he began, his voice steady now despite the magnitude of what he was asking. 3 weeks ago you were crying in my closet because someone had threatened your family. You could have asked me for help, could have requested a loan or a favor, but instead you tried to handle it alone because you've been strong for so long you forgot how to let anyone else carry the weight. Era felt tears beginning to form as she looked down at him. This powerful man humbling himself before her. I want to carry that weight for the rest of your life, Dante continued. I want to be the person you come to when the world becomes too much, the person who stands between you and everything that might hurt you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're safe and loved and mine. He opened the box to reveal a ring that took her breath away, an emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the city lights and threw them back like captured stars. Will you marry me, Era? Will you let me love and protect you and your family for as long as we both live? Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I'll marry you. Dante slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then stood and pulled her into his arms for a kiss that tasted like commitment and forever. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. You understand what this means, he said quietly. Marrying me means entering my world completely. There will always be risks, always be enemies, always be the possibility that someone will try to use you to hurt me. I understand, Era replied. And I also understand that I'd rather face those risks with you than be safe anywhere else. Dante smiled at that, the genuine expression transforming his face into something younger and lighter than she had ever seen. My fierce secretary, he murmured. What am I going to do with you? Love me, Era replied simply. Protect me. Let me protect you back. Build something beautiful with me that's stronger than anything our enemies can tear down. Inside the penthouse, Maya was waiting with champagne and excitement, having apparently been in on the proposal plan. She hugged them both fiercely, tears of joy replacing the tears of fear she had shed just weeks before. As they sat together planning wedding details and talking about the future, Era realized her life had been completely transformed by a moment of vulnerability in Dante's closet. The woman who had hidden her breakdown behind expensive suits was gone, replaced by someone who could stand beside one of Chicago's most dangerous men as his equal partner. When Dante's phone rang with news that a rival family was considering expansion into their territory, Era listened to him handle the threat with calm authority while she planned seating arrangements for their wedding reception. This was her life now, love and violence intertwined, protection and danger existing side by side. And for the first time since her parents had died, Era felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The Cathedral of St. Mary looked like something from a fairy tale, all soaring Gothic arches and stained glass windows that painted rainbow patterns across the marble floors. Era stood in the bride's room, looking at herself in the full-length mirror while Maya fussed with the train of her wedding dress. The woman in the reflection bore little resemblance to the secretary who had broken down crying in Dante's closet 6 months earlier. That woman had been broken, overwhelmed, struggling to survive on her own strength. This woman wore confidence like expensive perfume, carried herself with the poise that came from knowing she was loved and protected by one of the most powerful men in Chicago. The dress was a masterpiece of Italian silk and French lace, designed by someone whose name Era couldn't pronounce, but whose reputation commanded respect from wealthy women around the world. It fit her perfectly, as if it had been created specifically for her body, which it had. Dante had spared no expense for their wedding, treating it like the merger of two kingdoms rather than just a celebration of love. You look like a queen, Maya said softly, stepping back to admire her handiwork. 6 months of therapy and safety had restored Maya's natural brightness, though she was more serious now, more aware of how quickly life could change. She was finishing her psychology degree with Dante's financial support, planning to specialize in trauma counseling for people who had experienced what she had lived through. I feel like one, Era replied, touching the emerald necklace that had been Dante's wedding gift to her. It matched her engagement ring and complemented the deep green of her eyes, making her feel like she was wearing captured starlight. A knock on the door announced Marco's arrival. He wore a formal black suit, and the kind of respectful expression usually reserved for visiting royalty. "Mrs. Delacroix," he said formally, then smiled. "Everyone's ready for you." The processional music began as Era made her way down the aisle, her arm linked with Vincent's since her father wasn't there to give her away. The cathedral was filled with an unusual mixture of guests. Chicago's business elite sat beside Dante's extended organization, federal judges next to men who had never been arrested but everyone knew were dangerous. It was a wedding that served as both celebration and demonstration, announcing to the entire city that Era Delacroix was now under the protection of the Rossi family. But Era only had eyes for Dante as he waited for her at the altar. He wore a midnight black tuxedo that had been tailored to perfection, his dark hair styled impeccably, the bruises from their warehouse battle long since healed. When their eyes met across the distance, his expression softened into something so tender it made her heart skip. The ceremony itself was traditional Catholic, complete with Latin prayers and rituals that connected them to centuries of similar unions. When Dante slipped the wedding band onto her finger during the exchange of vows, his hands were perfectly steady, his voice clear and strong as he promised to love and protect her for as long as they both lived. Era's own vows were equally firm, promising to stand beside him through whatever challenges their life together might bring, to be his partner in all things, to love him with the same fierce loyalty he had shown her family. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Dante's kiss was gentle and reverent, mindful of their audience, but carrying the promise of deeper passion when they were alone. The cathedral erupted in applause and cheering, a sound that echoed off stone walls and made the moment feel epic in scope. The reception was held at the Palmer House Hotel, the grand ballroom decorated with white roses and crystal that created an atmosphere of elegant celebration. Era moved through the crowd on Dante's arm, accepting congratulations from people whose names she was still learning, but whose respect was clearly genuine. She danced with Dante to their chosen song, something slow and romantic that gave them an excuse to hold each other close while hundreds of people watched. In his arms, surrounded by the evidence of his power and influence, Era felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 3 weeks later, they were in Sicily for their honeymoon, staying at the Rossi family's ancestral villa that overlooked the Mediterranean Sea. The house was centuries old, built of honey-colored stone and filled with artwork and furniture that had been passed down through generations of Dante's family. "This is where I want to bring our children someday," Dante told her as they stood on the terrace watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. "I want them to understand where they come from, to know they're part of something larger than themselves." "Our children," Era repeated, testing the words and finding they felt right in her mouth. "How many children are we talking about?" Dante pulled her closer, his hands settling possessively on her waist. "As many as you want to give me," he said against her ear. "I want this house filled with laughter and little voices speaking both English and Italian." 6 months after their wedding, Era stood in the bathroom of their penthouse staring at a pregnancy test that showed 2 pink lines. She had suspected for a week, had been fighting morning sickness that she attributed to stress from her new responsibilities as the wife of a crime boss. But there was no denying the evidence in her hands. When she emerged from the bathroom, Dante took one look at her face and knew immediately what the test had revealed. His expression transformed into something so joyful it took her breath away, and he swept her into his arms with a whoop of celebration that probably carried through the entire building. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderfully, spinning her around the bedroom before setting her down carefully, as if she were made of spun glass. "Our baby, Era. We're going to have a baby." Maya squealed with excitement when they called to share the news, immediately launching into plans for becoming the world's best aunt. She was excelling in her studies, planning to graduate summa cum laude, and already accepted to graduate programs with full financial support from Dante's Education Foundation. The foundation had become Era's primary focus over the past months, a legitimate charitable organization that provided scholarships and support for families affected by violence and trauma. It gave her a way to use her organizational skills and business degree while making a positive difference in the world, balancing the darker aspects of being married to a man in Dante's position. She also served as an unofficial advisor to Dante's legitimate business interests, helping him expand into legal enterprises that would provide stable income streams independent of his traditional operations. Her accounting background and analytical mind had proven invaluable for structuring investments and acquisitions that enhanced their financial security. 1 year after their wedding, Era stood in the nursery of their penthouse, watching Dante rock their 6-month-old son to sleep. Little Michael Rossi had his father's dark hair and his mother's brown eyes, and he had already wrapped both parents completely around his tiny fingers. "Do you ever think about that day in the closet?" Dante asked quietly, careful not to wake the baby. "Do you ever wonder how different things might have been if I hadn't found you crying?" Era moved to stand beside his chair, her hand resting gently on his shoulder as she looked down at their son. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I realized that everything had to happen exactly the way it did for us to end up here. Maya had to be taken for you to realize you loved me. I had to break down completely for you to see me as more than just an employee." Dante looked up at her with eyes that held the same fierce devotion she had seen on their wedding day. "Finding you in that closet was the moment my real life started," he said softly. "Everything before that was just preparation for becoming the man you needed me to be." As they put Michael in his crib and prepared for bed themselves, Era reflected on the complete transformation of her existence. She was no longer the struggling secretary who cried alone when life became overwhelming. She was Era Rossi, wife of one of Chicago's most powerful men, mother of his heir, manager of a charitable foundation that had already helped dozens of families. More importantly, she was loved with an intensity that still took her breath away, protected by someone who would destroy anyone who threatened her happiness, partnered with a man who valued her strength as much as her vulnerability. When Dante pulled her into his arms that night, she thought about how love had changed them both. He had learned to choose connection over isolation, family over empire building, partnership over control. She had learned to accept protection without losing independence, to be vulnerable without being weak, to love someone dangerous without fear. The woman who had hidden her breakdown in a closet full of expensive suits was gone forever, replaced by someone who could stand beside Chicago's most dangerous man as his equal in all things. And every morning, when she woke up safe and loved in his arms, Era was grateful for the phone call that had shattered her old life and made her new one possible. Outside their bedroom windows, the city of Chicago glittered in the darkness, a kingdom they ruled together with love and loyalty and the kind of fierce devotion that could survive anything the world might throw at them.